want to talk today about what I want to call White Lives Matter the most. We've all heard over the last 2 years, if you will, the beacon call in the African American community that Black Lives Matter. And what I am offended by, what has been very disconcerting, is how many in white America are saying all lives matter. I heard David Clark, the Milwaukee sheriff, at the Republican National Convention, open his speech up with, "Now we have blue lives matter." All of a sudden, all lives matter. But let me say this, I find it grossly ironic when I look at the Republican presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. I see a man that should have been, could have been indicted for fraud, for what we are learning about his Trump University and his dealings with the so-called students or enrollees in his real estate program. In fact, the New York Attorney General said that it is straight out fraud, what he has seen thus far. And then when I look at the Democratic presumptive nominee, Hillary Clinton, who should have been and could have been indicted with regards to her mishandling of classified information with her whole email and her whole personal server business, the whole Benghazi scandal, of how she mishandled and mischaracterized that whole tragic event. Both of these candidates, despite their shady dealings, despite their questionable past, it is interesting that here they are running for the highest position in the land as president. That their past is no barriers. Their questionable deeds have become of no consequence. And then I look in the African American community, where in some cases unemployment is as high as 52%. Many times young black men can't find a job as a dishwasher because maybe they've had a shoplifting charge when they were juveniles. And when I see this, and I am offended now when people say, "No, why are you saying Black Lives Matter? All lives matter." No. What has been apparent to me and many of us in my community is that white lives matter the most. We have a sitting president who is African American, Obama. And when he threw his name in the hat, you should have heard all of the jackals howling. They questioned his place of birth. They questioned where he went to church. They questioned his wife's term paper that she wrote in college, because it is apparent that everything he did was going to be questioned, was going to be looked at in a questionable manner, that his background would have to be not 100% pristine, but 110% and 25% pristine. Black Lives Matter. But yep, white lives apparently matter the most. There are a lot of people who have been screaming bloody murder that we have the audacity to have a movement that pushes this beacon call of Black Lives Matter. Remember former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani said that it's divisive. The Milwaukee sheriff, as I mentioned earlier, David Clark, said that the term is divisive. Donald Trump has recently said that the term is divisive. And I say to you, yep, the term is divisive. The term should be divisive. Webster defines the word divisive as causing hostility between groups of people. And I will say to you, there has always been a passive hostility between groups of people. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when we call out and when we cry out that Black Lives Matter, we are hoping for hostility among various groups of people. We hope that all people understand what the African American plight has been, and that is Black lives truly have mattered the least, and white lives seem to have mattered the most. Think about this. For the African American, this is our experience. 250 years of slavery. 100 years of Jim Crow. And 50 years of so-called freedom. Freedom to just continue to realize that after 300 years, our lives don't matter. I found some statistics that prove that over the last 50 years, they emphasize white privilege, if you will, and the lack of privilege for white America over the last 50 years. And the 50 years, remember, historically is supposed to be our freedom years. Listen to this. I got this from Washington Post. They published this in August of 2013. That the black unemployment rate has consistently in the last 50 years been twice as high as white unemployment in the last 50 years. Black unemployment has been well above the recession levels in the last 50 years. Unemployment has been at 6% for most people, even during recessions. But our experience has been double that. The gap in household income between blacks and whites has not narrowed in the last 50 years. We are still making far less money over the last 50 years, or what I'm going to term our freedom years, proving that black lives don't matter. White lives matter the most. There is a professor, well-known professor, her name is Peggy McIntosh from Wellesley College in Brooklyn, New York, and she wrote a wonderful piece, and she came up with this term called the invisible backpack when she speaks to white privilege in America. She calls it the invisible backpack. She says an invisible backpack is a backpack of unearned rights and privileges that white people enjoy. Privilege exists when one group has something of value that is denied to others simply because of the groups they belong to, rather than because of anything they've done or failed to do. She calls this the invisible backpack. White people have not had to say that white lives matter. White folks have not had to have a white movement to gain access, to gain privilege and opportunity, because they have this invisible backpack, or they have this unconscious understanding that white lives matter the most. They have this wink that goes on in the boardrooms, that goes on in Wall Street, that goes on in DC, that white lives matter the most. I want to read to you some statistics that are very alarming with regards to the black experience, proving that white lives matter, black lives matter the least, and white lives matter the most. It says that young black men, the ages of 15 to 19, are 21 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than their white counterparts. 21 times. Blacks are less than 13% of the US population, yet they are 31% of all fatal police shooting victims. It's only 13% in population. But yet when it comes to fatal police shootings, they make up 31%. And out of those 31%, 39% that were killed by police weren't even a threat. We saw that recently in Minnesota and in Baton Rouge. And also we just saw it again in Miami. Look at this. A study in Arizona found that state highway patrol are 3.5 times more likely to search and stop Native Americans, and 2.5 more times to search and stop African Americans than they are a white person. And yet the statistics say whites who were searched, whenever they were searched, or the few times they were searched, were more likely than all other groups of people to be transporting drugs, guns, and other contraband. Why? Because white lives matter the most. A study in Georgia discovered that this 20% of the black defendants that were convicted of murdering white victims, 20% of the time they received the death penalty. However, only 8% of whites who killed a white received the death penalty. And what's even more startling, 1% of whites who killed a black received the death penalty. I say to you, whose lives matter the most? This is why we are ringing the bell for attention. This is why we have become the squeaky wheel once again. Because I think the rest of America don't understand that at the end of the day, black lives over the last 300, 400 years have mattered the least. And if you don't believe that, you believe in a white lie.